12th of May 1968, Mr. Jiddu Krishnamurti's second public talk in Amsterdam.
If we may, we will continue with what we were talking about yesterday. When you look at a whole field stretching out to the horizon, a field of tulips, as you see, words come into your mind. How beautiful it is. The color, the brilliancy, the texture, the depth of the color. This whole field of color, with its beauty, is put into words. Or you translate it in terms of some symbol. Or you want to write about it, paint it, carry some of those flowers back to your house. And as you observe, thought begins to discern, to judge, to evaluate. And as you still go on looking, there is a space between you and the flower and that field of brilliant color. This space, this division between the observer, the thinker, and the thing observed and the thought are two separate things. In this division between the observer and the thing observed is the whole issue of life, the whole problem of existence. Then, in that division, there is conflict. There is choice. There is constant struggle. And as we said yesterday morning, we have many problems at all the levels of our existence. And we asked ourselves if it is not possible to find the root of all these innumerable, complex, subtle problems, and not deal each problem by itself. Whether we could, by observing the very core, the very root of our problems, whether it's not possible to go beyond by observing that one root from which all our problems spring. And we also asked yesterday whether it is possible for man living in modern society with its tremendous pressures, with its competitions, with its corrupt morality, with its total disorder, whether it is at all possible to be free of fear. Not only the fear of something we do not know as death, but also the fear of life, the daily, monotonous life of routine, of strife, of endless competition, this constant measurement of oneself with something more, the measurement of success, of achievement, in which there is frustration, there is agony, there is incessant battle within and without. And whether man, that is you and I, can ever be free from the central issue, or rather one of the main issues of life, which is fear. We said also yesterday that thought is the origin of fear. A thought which divides the observer from that beautiful field of tulips. And whether thought which interferes, which gives shape, a certain contour of judgment, whether that thought which breeds pain and pleasure, whether that thought upon which we depend so much to solve all our problems, whether that thought can ever resolve any problem. So that may be the central issue, that may be the core which, if we understand, may resolve all our problems. Because man has relied on thought. Everything we do or we don't do is born out of thought. Thought is idea. Organized thought is idea. And according to an idea, an ideal, we act. Action, if you observe, is always a living thing. To do, to be, to act, is always in the living present. And the idea, the ideal, is in the future, unreal. So, in action, there is always conflict. When there is a division between the act, the doing, which is now, and always comparing the doing with what is the ideal. Then in that there is conflict. And so there is no action at all. Action then is merely an approximation of what should be. So one asks oneself whether it is possible to act. Please just listen to it first. Don't say it is or it is not. Whether it is possible to act without idea. That is, the seeing is the doing. And we do this when there is great danger, when we are confronted with something, with a tremendous crisis. With great danger, there is instant action. There is not the idea or the ideal according to which you are acting. There is instant response to an immediate challenge. And there, thought has no time to operate. You must have noticed this yourselves in our own lives, that when there is some grave danger or immediate demand for action, thought has no time to come and interfere with the doing. And as we said yesterday, fear, with which I am concerned this morning, is born out of thought. Thinking of tomorrow, of what has been a pleasure or pain of yesterday, sustaining that pain or pleasure through thought, gives a continuity to pleasure or pain. That's fairly clear, I think, isn't it? Take any problem that one has. The national, international, the feeling of isolation, the feeling of being one group, one community, opposed to another community. The white against the black and so on. The problem was created by thought, which is fairly clear. Thought, which has sought security through division, through nationality, through separatism, has created the problem. Then thought sets about to resolve that problem. And thought cannot resolve that problem. One may pass laws, but legislation does not destroy separateness. The sense of isolation or exclusion, opposed to other. And yet we employ thought all the time to resolve all our problems. And when you observe, thought has created the problem. Take war. Man, for 5,000 years, historically, has had 15,000 wars. That means 2.5 wars every year. Thought has bred war, antagonism. Thought has built a way of life which must inevitably lead to war. One realizes that. Then thought says there must be peace. So it sets about inventing various ways, plans, methods, strengthening itself in one hand as a nationalistic army, and yet with the other hand stretching out for international peace and brotherhood and goodness. It's all this contradiction is brought about by thought. And as one observes in all human relationships, thought, seeking comfort, security, pleasure, sexual or otherwise, creates many problems. And so we resort to thought to resolve these very problems which thought has created. And one can see how fear comes into being. Not only a physical fear of pain, of disease, of old age and death, or the pain, physical pain that one has had some time ago, and it may come back. Thought remembers the past experience and is remembering it, reacting to that remembrance. Thought produces fear. You can see this clearly in one's life. One has a disease, physical pain, cancer, other forms of disease. And thought, which has remembered a state of mind when there was no pain, no disease, gets frightened of it. And then thought says, what are the ways out of it, physically? When one has disease, as most of us do have some kind of physical disorder and pain, why should thought interfere at all? Thought as a response of memory when one had no pain at all. Why should such thought interfere? Which only breeds further anxiety. And psychologically, inwardly, inside the skin, we have many problems of fear. From the most simple thing like fear of darkness, to the most complex problem of human relationship, which is called love and death. As one observes within oneself, not according to any philosopher, any analyst, or any specialist, when you do observe according to another, then you are not observing yourself. You are observing yourself according to some specialist. What he says becomes far more important than what actually you are. But if you put aside all the specialists' investigations and assertions, you can see for yourself the innumerable contradictory states the anxiety, the guilt, the sense of loneliness, despair, routine, the way of life which becomes mechanical. Thought breeds this. So one asks oneself whether thought, which has its place, thought being mechanical, thought being old, thought which is the result of experience, memory, knowledge, that must operate. When you do mechanical things, like remembering one's address, like remembering a technological activity, their thought must operate. Otherwise, we couldn't possibly live or do anything. But has thought any place other than that? Because as we said, thought breeds fear. Fear not only of our neighbor, fear of life, fear of ourselves, fear of so many things. And as one observes oneself, within oneself, as a human being, we can see very well how fear has come into existence. And is it possible to be free completely of fear? Which means really the whole investigation of the structure and nature of thought man has lived, as one observes, on thought. Life is a something that's constantly new. Life is challenging us all the time with new demands, with new phases, new way of living. And to that challenge we always respond according to our old pattern, which is thought. And so there is a contradiction. So, is it possible, please don't think I'm crazy, is it possible to end thought? Is it possible to look at that field of tulips without the interference of thought or the word? I do not know if you ever tried, if you ever done it, to look at a flower, at a cloud or at a tree, without the word, without the memory, knowledge of that thing which you have seen before, and to look at it as though you are looking at it for the very first time. To look at it without the thinker. And therefore, without thought. So that space between you as the observer and the thing observed ceases. Not that you become the flower or identify yourself with the flower, which would be absurd. You can't be a tulip or the lovely tree or the cloud. People try to identify themselves with that which they see. That is too infantile, too immature. But to see that field of tulips without the center, without the observer, the thinker. If you ever done it, you will say that space disappears. And when there is no space between the observer and the observed, then the observer is the observed. That's fairly easy to do outwardly. With a flower, with a cloud, with a bird that's flying across the sky. And this is done through various forms of drugs which they have been experimenting with. Because a drug, a chemical, removes that space instantly. And there is that sense of complete, total observation of what is. Please do follow this. Because we're going to something very complex presently. Just listen to it. We're not advising that you should take drugs in order to destroy the separateness. It doesn't actually destroy at all. A drug brings about a chemical change in the whole system, making the system highly sensitive. And this sensitiveness to the flower on the table destroys that space, but it is artificial. And you have to take the drug again in order to have that experience. We have not taken it. But you can see, when I talk to those who have taken it, and you can see what actually takes place. As we said, when you observe sensuously, with your eyes, the tulip and this colour stretching right to the other end, without word, without any movement of mind or thought, then space disappears and there is quite a different state of mind which looks. As we said, that's fairly easy to do with objective things. But it becomes much more complex, much more subtle, when you have to do with inward things, such as fear, such as anger, aggression, violence. When there is violence, which is the inheritance of the animal in man. Because we are all extraordinarily violent people, aggressive people. Now, to recognize, first of all, inwardly, to recognize that one is violent, which takes so many different forms. Violence in opinion, in judgment, in assertion, domination, the violence of self-discipline, the violence of conformity to a pattern, the violence of acceptance and obedience. The violence that exists in each of one, in so many people. The violence to dominate, to assert, to attain power, position, prestige. Almost all human beings, this exists, this violence. Sexually and in other ways. Now, how to deal with violence so that it is completely, totally eradicated from the mind, from the whole structure of thought. Now when you observe that violence in yourself, if you are at all aware of that violence, as you observe, you see that there is a thinker, and the thing called violence, aggression, anger, and so on. Please, as we are talking, do it. Observe it, if I may suggest, in yourself. You may not be at this present moment angry, violent. But as you observe, you can see there are times when you have been greatly angry. And as you observe, you will see that there is a division between the thing called anger and the observer. The observer says, I have been angry, or I must not be angry anymore. There is violence and non-violence. Now, as you observe, naturally there is a division between so-called anger and this entity that says, I am angry, I have been angry. Right? That's fairly simple. Then when there is this division between the thinker and the thought, between the thinker who says, I have been angry, there is a division. There is a separation. Right? In that time interval, in that space, there is the conflict of overcoming anger, trying to control it, trying to pass beyond it, or accepting it as being natural, inevitable. So in that interval begins all the conflict. Right? Please do it as we are talking. Actually do it. And you will see for yourself the fact that emerges out of this. Now, we have accepted this division for centuries, for millions of years. That has become part of our tradition. The way to deal with anger. I'm only taking that as an example. That is to overcome, control, suppress it, and so on, so on, so on. The entity who suppresses it, controls it, is something separate. We think. Now, is it separate? Or is the entity who thinks he is angry, is anger himself? Is not separate at all. There is only a state of anger, a state of violence. When we recognize the fact that we are violent, then we invent the ideal of non-violence, hoping thereby to overcome violence, using the idea of non-violence as a means or as a lever to get rid of violence. This is what is our traditional way of dealing with anything. Now, is there a different way so that there is no conflict at all when you meet violence in oneself? I hope you're following my question. We know the normal, accepted, traditional way of dealing with any problem as violence. All that involves, in all that is involved, conflict, struggle, pain. And at the end of it, you are not rid of violence. It is still there. So one asks, is there a different way altogether, which is not traditional at all? Which is to observe that anger without the interference of thought. As you observed that flower in the field, and as you observed that flower without any thought, there was neither the observer nor the observed. There was only a state of seeing. In the same way, is it possible to look at violence without the interference of thought, to merely observe it? This becomes quite a complex problem, because when we say we are violent, the very process of recognition of violence is the product of thought, right? That is, you have been angry before, yesterday, and there is the remembrance of it today. And then when you are angry a little later, the remembrance of that experience which you have called anger yesterday, that memory responds to the new reaction which is called anger. So thought, in the process of recognizing anger or violence and wanting to get rid of it, is still a way of conflict, suppression or imitation, right? You're following some of this or not at all, it doesn't matter. It's up to you anyhow. Because one must totally be free of violence. Otherwise we are not human beings. When a mind is violent, in any form, in the expression of a word, a look, a gesture, you destroy love. And when you have no love, there will be no peace in the world. You may have all the leagues of nations and everything that's happening in the world more and more, but you'll never have peace. And without peace you cannot see clearly. There is no love. There is only this ugly, monstrous civilization of the machine. I do not know if you have ever talked to the specialists who are running, who are concerned with the electronic brain, with the computers, what they are doing. The computers are taking over all the activities of man, almost all the activities. They are building a society where the machine is going to rule. It obviously is coming. Man is going to have a great deal of leisure. And only perhaps the specialists will be the masters. And the rest will be slaves like you and I. A new culture is being built, probably of which we are not at all aware. Those who are concerned with it, involved in it, are greatly perturbed. Unless we human beings bring about total mutation in the way of our living, which is in the way of life, when thought, which is merely mechanical, thought is not new, not fresh, nothing, a quality of freshness in it at all. If thought is going to control our life, then thought in the computer, as the computer is going to guide our life. That's why it's enormously important. Please do look at it for your own selves. Enormously important to find out a way of living where thought, which is mechanical, doesn't intervene except when it has to function mechanically. That's why it's very important to understand the nature of thought and its structure. What is thought? What is thinking? Don't wait for the speaker to answer it. Here is a challenge. Do please listen to it. Here is a challenge, which is, what is thought? What is thinking? What is the origin of thought? That's a challenge, which is something new. And how do you respond to it? Do you begin to search for an answer? Wait for somebody to tell you the answer? Or do you say, I don't know? And in the very saying, I don't know, you're waiting to find out and say, I do know now the answer. Or when you meet at such an immense challenge, what happens? Your mind, if the challenge is really vital, important, then the mind becomes quiet, doesn't it? Thought is in abeyance because it is no answer. But we, wanting an answer, wishing to find a way out of this mechanical way of life, use thought to find out. And so we reduce the new challenge, and challenges are always new if they are vital. And they are vital. Our houses are burning. Our morality, our churches, our society is in disintegration, corrupt. There's an immense challenge which we have to meet. The challenge of the computer and the relation of man to it. And if you wait for the specialist to answer that question, then you're back again, caught. So, how to bring about a complete mutation, a complete change in our life? A change, a mutation that will solve all our problems. I think the root of our problems, of fear, violence, and the immense sorrow of life, and the everlasting search for pleasure, is the root cause, the core of all this problem is thought. And is it possible to end, to put a stop to time? Time which is thought. We are used to the idea, we are used to the tradition that gradually, slowly, day after day, eventually, we will be different. There will be, through evolution, a mutation of the mind, so that we shall have, human beings will have a totally different mind. When you admit that eventually you will have a new mind, a totally different quality in the structure and nature of the mind, when you admit that, you are already now living in a world of mechanical existence. And this generation will be responsible for the next. Through education, through all the rest of it. So there is no eventual change at all. We are becoming more and more mechanical, not less. So, the fundamental question is not how to get rid of fear or violence or the innumerable problems that each one of us has. The fundamental question is whether thought as time can come to an end, so that there is no actual tomorrow, psychologically. Do you understand? Please, do be concerned with it. Be involved in it. In this question. We are so easily commit ourselves to a course of action. I think there is a difference between being committed and being involved. We are involved with life. We are not committed to life. When you are committed to a course of action, as a communist, as a socialist, as a Catholic, or what you will, that commitment is a deliberate process of the intellect and thought. There is nothing new in that. But if you are involved, as we are, in daily life, with all the problems involved, then there is no separation. It's not the function of thought which says, I am involved. You are involved. And so one asks, is it possible for thought as time and fear to come to an end? Now we have explained sufficiently in detail the way of thought, the way of time. We'll go into it differently at another time. But the explanation, the description, and the cause will never put an end to time. Mere listening to a description giving a description of what good food is to a hungry man is no value. He wants food. So, if you're merely satisfied with the description of the way of thought, and be reconciled yourself with the description, then there is no ending. But if you are involved in the question, as you must be involved, if you are at all serious, and it's only to the very serious man life is, or to the only serious man that is living. Not the man who is committed to some form of activity, political, social, religious, which makes him serious. Such a person is not serious. But a man who is involved and is concerned with the problems of the whole of life, not casually, not as an observer just looking from the outside, but being involved in it completely, with your heart and with your mind, then you have to answer this question. Whether mind, which is the result of thought, which is the result of time as evolution, time from the animal till now, millions of years, has produced this brain. And now that brain is acting mechanically, is so heavily conditioned. Can there be a total mutation so that we live at a different dimension altogether? That is the real problem. Now, how do you answer it? Sorry, it's 12 again. How do you answer this question? The traditional way to answer this question is to analyze. To analyze the whole process of our living, step by step. Not only the unconscious, but the conscious mind that is analyzing every feeling, every thought, every movement, which the analysts and the psychologists are doing. And that involves time. And in that process also, there's a great danger. Because to analyze, you must not only have the capacity to analyze extraordinarily clearly, without any bias, without any misjudgment. And you cannot possibly analyze because the analyzer himself is conditioned. And so the whole analytical, intellectual, verbal process involves time. While you are analyzing day after day the mechanical process of society, culture is shaping your mind. forcing you, directing you, driving you. So analysis is not the way. You must see the truth of that. Because if you see the truth of and the falseness of analysis, then you will reject it totally. Then when you do reject totally the way of analysis, which we have done a little bit today, then seeing the falseness of it is seeing the truth of it. Right? When you see something false and recognizing it being false, the very action is truth. When you do that, when you completely see the falseness of analysis, then what have you? Then you are faced with the problem of looking without the drive of the analyzer. You understand? Right? You are looking without analysis at the fact. Look, when you look at fear, we know the general method of analysis, overcoming, discipline involved in all that. And when you see all that will take time, many days, and while you are occupied in that analysis, the mechanical process of existence around you, society, culture, is already shaping you, destroying you. So, when you see that and deny that, then you are looking at fear as though with fresh eyes, aren't you? There is no overcoming it, there is no analyzing it, but looking at it. As you look at that field of tulips, you are looking at this fear. When you look at this fear without the analyzer, without the thinker, without the observer, then is there fear at all? And you can only look when the mind is completely quiet. When you look at that field of bluebells, and your mind is chattering, inattentive, then you're really not looking at those flowers. But when you give your total, complete attention, which is to give your mind, your heart, your nerves, your eyes, your ears, to look totally, then you will say, there is no division at all, and therefore there is no fear at all. You can't accept this. You have to do it. That means you have to be involved in it. And you are involved in it. It's your life. Therefore, to look is the greatest of miracles. You have to do nothing else but to give complete attention to looking at that field, to looking at your wife or your husband, to looking at your belief, to look at your opinions, judgments, evaluations with complete attention. Then you will say, there is no state of fear at all. The mind has undergone a tremendous change. It's only a mind that is inattentive that makes mischief.